Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome or welcome back, as the case might be. My name is Dalibor Petrovic. I'm the founder of the Summit Leadership Alliance and the host of these TechTonic Conversations, a channel where we are bringing to you conversations with Canadian technology leaders, but also founders and CEOs of Canadian technology startup and scale up companies. Today is Tuesday, February 18th. It's a frigid Tuesday on this February 18th. And I am thrilled to welcome uh, Josh Malate. Josh is the co-founder and co-founder along with Doug Schweitzer of Ultimarii. And I'm learning it's a Latin pronunciation that I'm getting just right. Ultimarii. It's an AI-powered solution for highly regulated industries. What an interesting concept that we're going to learn more about. Josh, first and foremost, thank you very much for finding the time to be with me and our guests today.
Yeah, excited to be here. And yeah, Ultimarii is a Latin Italian term that essentially means to complete a project, which is very relevant to the work that we do.
Very much so, very much so. So, Josh, of course, this morning we were hoping to also have Doug Schweitzer join us, but given that these are live conversations, something came up. Doug couldn't join us. You are here with us. We are going to, of course, proceed into the conversation. Um, my desire here is to have a conversation with Canadian technology founders, leaders of our technology community, and to do that, I would prefer not to be introducing you at all, but instead to ask you to actually tell us your story. And maybe this is where we should start. If you don't mind describing to our audiences a little bit of who you are and how you navigated your life and career to now be co-founding Ultimarii along with Doug Schweitzer, then we're going to talk about Ultimarii. And of course, if anyone within our audiences has any questions and comments, please, of course, feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A function of this Zoom platform. So with that, Josh,
Awesome. Well,
Mike is over to you.
thanks so much, Dalibor. I'm very excited to be here and share this conversation with you. In terms of introduction and background, maybe I'll give some uh, fence posts of my life, and then we can dig in different areas that strike any interest. And so fundamentally, I'm a builder. I love building things. I have since I was a kid. That led me to end up going into an undergrad in civil engineering. Ended up coming out of there building projects. So working on large capital projects. Uh, I built the West LRT C train line, which I spent about 3 years on, which was a very interesting project. Learned a lot of things, moved into other rail projects, building projects, renovations. As I enjoyed that kind of work, there was a risk appetite in me that wanted more. I didn't love applying safety factors of 3 onto everything. I wanted safety factors of zero point 0.1. And so I shouldn't be in the business of building buildings in that case. And so, since I was a civil engineer, logically started to get into elements of real estate. So, buying properties, flipping them, buying and holding. I did that for a few years, made a little bit of money, but I ended up taking that money and rolling it into another venture, which is what will be a common theme, and rolled that into actually purchasing a hotel in downtown Calgary.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, that was a crazy endeavor. That was the first time I ever had a staff. I actually, as I was purchasing a hotel, I actually didn't realize that I would have staff on day one. And so sort of showed up and was like, oh, now I have, 10 people working for me. So that was a whole bunch of learning that I can talk a lot about. Ended up selling that again, ended up with a little bit more capital at my disposal. Had no idea what I wanted to do. So what do we do when that happens? I went back to school, got an MBA in finance as at the University of Calgary. As I was there, started to understand a little bit about the tech ecosystem that had started to come to life in Calgary and Alberta and across Canada. I had this capital. I started to invest it in different companies, also started to do a little bit of consulting. Not that I was an expert in any way, but I could work hard, I could dig in, I could build business plans and build business models. And so I ended up actually founding a small consulting company with a few partners, and we worked just building business plans for different companies and a wide variety of companies, like an online plant retailer, medical device company that did frequent blood testing. That was not Theranos. A medical imaging company, an educational software company to learn physical skills, a whole wide variety, and actually learned a whole bunch in terms of strategy as well as business model and how to essentially create commercial models that end up, helping a company to become sustainable, which means you have to be profitable. And
Yeah.
so learned a whole bunch there. As well on that journey, ended up, investing in a lot of different technology companies. And as I sit here today, I have a portfolio of about 29 private companies.
29 companies that you invested in.
Yes, yeah. The majority here in
Wow.
Alberta, a few in Ontario, and actually two in the US as well. And have learned a whole bunch from getting to be on the sidelines as a shareholder, witnessing the growth of those businesses as well. One of the companies that I put an early check into was a company called Athenian. It was actually called Paper Interactive at the time. And I invested, and within 2 months, I was the fractional CFO. And within another 2 months, I was full time in the business as CFO, ended up being co founder and chief operating officer as well. Very cool business. We essentially took the corporate minute book, which is a very specific legal item
Yeah.
that scales all the ownership of a company. We digitized that. We did that across Canada, then into the US, then around the world. Built that company into about 120 people. We raised about 50 million in venture capital, and the software is being used in pretty much every country in the world to manage these corporate records or digital entities, essentially. And so that was an amazing build, but I love the 0 to 1. And so that company is going very well. But I had the itch to start something new. And so, as you mentioned, I got together with Doug Schweitzer, who has an illustrious career. But I met him when he was the Minister of Jobs, Economy, and Growth at the government of Alberta. He had a background as a lawyer, so we hit it off because we were building a legal technology company. And Doug and I started to ideate on a whole bunch of things. Our original idea is we're going to put together ideas and capital and then find great founders to build great legal technology companies. Finding great founders is the limiting ingredient, though. And so at one point, we looked at each other and we said, "Hey, why don't we just be the founders of one of these ideas?" And that was essentially the genesis for Ultimarii and where we are today. And so we're about a year and 2 months into that build right now. And so happy to talk a lot about what we're doing on that as well.
Absolutely. What a fascinating story. First of all, congratulations. Congratulations. Can you maybe uh, give me and our audiences a bit of a sort of time reflection? How did this unfold? Or like at what time? When did you get the hotel? When did you sell the hotel? Where did you start investing in tech companies?
For sure. Yeah, definitely. And a lot of these things overlap. So like it sounds like I should be like 60 years old, but I'm obviously not. And so yeah, ended up I graduated in 2009, ended up going into the workforce, started to build real estate a bit on the side as I was working full time as an engineer. Ended up purchasing the hotel in 2013. And I exited it for those in the Alberta context just before the price of oil dropped in 2015. So inked the deal just before price of oil dropped, which was
Whoa,
very serendipitous. And then we closed the deal sort of after that crash there. Then started to invest in technology companies starting in 2016. Built Athenian from 2016 to mid 2022, and then we founded Ultimarii in 2024.
amazing! What fantastic! You are exactly the person that I am proud to welcome as a guest. Like this is the builders is what I'm after in this
Yes,
program, right? The builders is what we are after. So thanks, Josh. Um, of course, we can talk about. Uh, I'm sure 29 exciting stories here, but we wanted to unpack Ultimarii a little bit deeper. So if you could maybe help our audiences understand what is the problem that Ultimarii exists to solve, and then how is it solving the problem?
For sure. Yeah, love it. Ultimarii fundamentally, our view of the world and where some problems and challenges lie is that it's very difficult to build things. Regulation has become extremely complex and administratively burdensome. And Doug, who's my co-founder in this, knows this very well. He served in government, actually helping to craft and revise regulations and understands the challenges and understood the challenges of doing so. And between him and I, we understood, okay, there's only so much you can do in terms of pulling policy levers to try to address this problem. And so we said, okay, let's look at it from a technology and innovation perspective. How can we help to get things built faster was essentially the problem set that we came up with just about 13 months ago. And so we actually zoomed in on it from a data perspective. And we thought, okay, if we're going to build things and there's regulations that are, for the benefit of society, all regulations are not bad. A lot of
Yeah.
regulations are very good. And so, but administratively burdensome. And so what if we looked at all of the data in terms of all of the previous applications that have gone before regulators? If we look at all of the questions and answers, if we look at all of the documentation that specific people that want to comment on a project, sometimes called interveners, would put in, what if we took all of that data, which is public data? We also work with companies, pull together some private data, which is their internal documentation on these types of projects. We start to bring that data together, have it be processed in a meaningful way, and then start to apply what everyone's talking about now, which is AI, large
Yeah.
language models, and putting that on top of that data set, but specifically for this idea of how do we get things built faster by speeding up the regulatory process. And that's fundamentally what Ultimarii is trying to do.
So your clients would be uh, organizations that want to build projects. These projects, I'm going to assume they're physical projects, right?
Yes, physical projects. So our customers are energy companies. These look like energy producers. They look like midstreamers. They look like power producers. They're also utilities. So think about now moving that energy around in certain forms. It's government, not only the regulators themselves who have their own challenges of how they actually regulate the industry, but also internal government departments that actually have to navigate the regulation themselves to build things. And then the third is actually the law firms that help to serve these customers to navigate these regulatory processes.
Such an interesting, unusual, but very real opportunity that you have surfaced.
It, it's what I enjoy, and if we look back at Athenian as well, very niche area of
Yeah.
these corporate minute books, but very data rich. And that was our strategy really from the start was we understood it was fundamental legal data in these minute books. It is the fundamental information about where is a company located and able to do business. Who are the shareholders of this company? Who are the governors of this company? What are the different names it goes by? And our thesis is and was that trickles down to every downstream corporate legal item that a company might undertake. And so if we could organize that data and make it readily available, then it would be very valuable. Similar thesis here at
Yeah.
Ultimarii. Let's go into a relatively niche area. I call them niche, but these are huge markets.
Yeah.
A relatively niche area that requires subject matter expertise to understand. So not anyone can found a company in these areas. You need some subject matter expertise. And then let's build against that. And fundamentally, we're serving, these larger, more complex organizations on these, more niche workflows.
Yeah. And given your background as a civil engineer, builder, and Doug's background as a lawyer and minister, this is a perfect intersection.
100%. I didn't realize how much my capital projects experience from what felt like a lifetime ago actually was very valuable as we were starting to pull together this company and understand the problem set, and even just understanding something as simple or complex as a project life cycle. Going from feasibility through front end engineering, through financing and regulatory to a final investment decision into design and construction.
So are you suggesting that at each step along the way, there is an opportunity for Ultimarii to add value.
Yes, definitely across the whole spectrum. Where we focused is more on the front end. So through
Yeah,
feasibility, front end engineering, regulatory financing, and up to final investment decision. As we started to look at the market, there's a lot of people playing in the, how do we optimize design? How do we
yeah.
optimize construction timelines? There's thousands of companies there. What we saw was there's not as many looking at the
Mm.
pre-final investment decision part of the project lifecycle, mostly because it's a much more amorphous part of the project. It could go, 1,000 different ways. And so it's much more difficult to build traditional technology, which looks like, workflows and decision trees. That's where we saw, okay, we're at a point in time, AI is just, becoming a point where it can be, deployed commercially into enterprises. Let's take it and apply it to this very, let's call it uncertain part of the project lifecycle.
And so your service would then help potential investor, if I get it right, achieve two things: have clarity on what regulation applies and how to navigate it, and therefore, number two, determine whether the investment is good or not, whether they should proceed with the project. Is that kind of, those are
That's
the two?
That's one of the use cases,
Yes.
like from an invest or a project financer's perspective. It
Yeah.
can help them understand regulatory risk in a project. I would say that our sort of bread and butter use cases are within the project developers themselves. And so, number one, they're looking to do just some general research to inform feasibility. They're looking to build regulatory roadmaps. So, as you described, it's like, so what steps do I need to do to get approved here? A third would be comparing updates in regulation. So they're happening all the time. It's a complex process of understanding, okay, this was the regulation as of this date. This is the new regulation. Think about how AI can actually pretty easily do that comparison and create really succinct narratives on what the differences in regulation are. And then another use case that's actually we're working with a lot of clients on is related to hearing preparation. So you think about, you spend a lot of time, you spend a lot of money with law firms, external consultants to prepare for these hearings, which essentially sometimes dictate whether a, $6 billion project is going to proceed or not proceed. And so you think about how much capital people will invest into preparing for that process to be ready for that hearing. And so we're used in a variety of ways to prepare for these types of hearings.
Now, where along this process do you see the biggest opportunity for artificial intelligence to actually be deployed? Uh, and like, how is it doing it through with the help of AI colleagues? Uh, the whole service better, faster, more accurate, cheaper. Where do you deploy AI in this? In this?
We see it can be applied across the entire journey. Where we're focusing as our initial entry point is in that regulatory approval piece.
Mhm.
And but where we see in the future where it could be most powerful is actually as you get into elements of like feasibility in terms of site selection, in terms of when you're sitting there and you could look at 1,000 different ways this project could manifest. We've always been limited in how many scenarios we could put together by the
Yes.
amount of capital, someone might have at the time, which very expensive cost of capital at those early days. If you could bring down the cost of running scenarios for different sites, for different setups, for different throughputs through different volumes, imagine how much you could optimize that investment by the time you get through those stages up to final investment decision. That's a little bit tinfoil hat, I would say today to be able to do that piece. We see we'll start with regulatory approvals, which is very concrete. We'll work our way back into this concept of feasibility and optimizing, across 1,000 possibilities of how a project can develop.
Fascinating, fascinating. So now that you mentioned the company is a little bit over 1 year old, I would be curious to get your reflections on how have things progressed. Perhaps What are the lessons that you've learned on this journey? Maybe some of your strategies and tactics, perhaps some of the challenges and how you're dealing with those.
Yeah, for sure. I have the benefit of having spent, 7 years building Athenian. And so I do feel, the second time around building something that's scaling, it's almost like you can see around a few corners. Still, you might see around the corner and still get punched in the face pretty hard.
Sure.
In terms of timeline, really high level timeline, Q1 2024, Doug and I ideated. And we actually purposely spent a good amount of time doing so. I felt like at Athenian, we sort of zoomed into the problem statement a little too quickly.
Mhm.
With Ultimarii, we spent a whole quarter and we actually talked with almost 75 different stakeholders around this problem set to get an idea of how we were going to approach it. And that was very, very valuable. Q2, we raised $2 million to be able to fund building this company. Q3, pulled together a team mostly of engineers and product folks and built our MVP. So that was Q3. Then in Q4, which was just before Christmas, started to sell. And we actually made it to meaningful revenue even within our first year of operation. Q1, where we are today, is we're deploying now into large enterprise, which, as many folks know, has many challenges to be able to do so. But we closed a whole bunch of sales before Christmas. Now we're following through with all of those through Q1 and essentially, making these customers successful in this area where AI has never been deployed before.
So, in other words, you are serving clients. It's a revenue generating enterprise already.
Yes, revenue generating. We've got about 15 customers now. These look like large enterprises. They look like oil sands companies, midstreamers, utilities, power producers. We're pretty close to our first government contract as well.
Wow. Hats off, Josh, to you and Doug. This is fantastic. What a great story. So, in other words, it took less than a year from identifying the problem to the point where you are actually revenue generating on your own. And is it a product? Like, do you have you said you developed MVP, so it
Yes.
is an actual product?
It's a product and so it's on a software as a service business model. What we're essentially doing is we're taking the incredible innovations that the foundational model companies are pulling forward. We're model agnostic, so we're pulling in different LLMs, whether it's OpenAI or Google's Gemini models. We're actually just starting to look at some of Anthropic's models as well. I As of this morning, Doug was talking about Gronk, which has come out as well, and so or Grok, and so we'll
Yeah.
we'll be taking at that as well. But what we've done that's differentiated to those foundational models is we've pulled together huge data sets of regulatory data. And we have that at the fingertips of these regulatory and legal professionals right away. So you can layer these models with that data and start to generate high value output. So start to get 90% there on a regulatory roadmap for a certain project. Start to get 90% there on drafting an issues brief for a specific issue related to a hearing. A really cool use case we've done is we've actually pulled together all of the intervener correspondence across, entire regulators. We pulled them together for specific interveners, put those in specific areas, and you can actually sort of scenario model with your project. What will this intervener say based on what it said to 1,000 other projects? So think about it like an intervener chatbot, I guess. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
like talk to it and be like, okay, how would you object to my project? What would your challenges be in what I'm trying to do here? And then fast forward a bit, how have other proponents actually satisfied those objections or challenges that have been brought forth?
This is fantastic. So the process that sometimes would take months or years, you can model and simulate and present it immediately,
Yes,
effectively.
yeah. And think about again, and you're able to actually explore 100 possibilities
That's right.
because the technology fundamentally makes those interactions cheaper as opposed to status quo. So status quo is like stakeholder engagement for that use
Yes.
case. Stakeholder engagement is like, okay, people have got to, put on a suit and drive out to the areas and, rent a hall and meet people and talk to them and take the notes, compile the note. Like, think about all of those steps that have gone into that engagement, which is still very valuable. And
Yeah.
there's still be contextual, specific new information about that project. But why not learn from the hundreds of other projects that have come before it, that have been discussed with that specific
Yeah.
stakeholder?
So in other words, that stakeholder engagement is still going to proceed potentially, but well focused, well informed. So the bet here is that we will go through this and it will be successful, given that we have learned from hundreds of other projects what was successful. This is wow. And then on top of that, you are bringing all the regulations that would impact that project into a single source of latest truth, I guess, to help inform the project sponsors on how to navigate around those, how not navigate around them, but how to actually meet them in the
Yes.
most effective way.
Exactly. Yeah, we have a team of subject matter experts that are, stay up to date with changing regulation. There's always, a good amount of lead time. And we bring in, even draft regulations, and tag it in a specific way. So it's known as draft to run comparisons. And then we always make sure that we have the most up-to-date regulation in the system as well.
And the regulation that we are talking about here would include combination of regulations that are federal government, provincial governments, municipal regulations, really, right? So multiple different regulatory frameworks that interact to ultimately, right?
Actually, regulators that look like the Canada Energy Regulator,
Yeah.
the Alberta Energy Regulator, BC Environmental Assessment Office. We've actually compiled, I think we're at 38 specific regulators across Canada that we're maintaining this data set against.
Wow. This is so cool. So I love hearing the stories like this, where where your expertise is unleashed to a problem that is very, very real and as of yet unsolved in the novel way that you are solving it. This is such a fantastic story. Thank you for sharing that. Josh, you are clearly a successful technology investor. I am really curious to get your experiences, your thoughts on actually what it feels like to be investing in Canadian technology startups and scale ups. Like, what have you learned over the last? I was just thinking in my head about 9, 10 years of investing in tech. What are your lessons? What works well in Canada? What doesn't work well? Where are the opportunities? Where are the challenges? What can we do as a community of people who are in technology to help ourselves advance this forward for us and for the country?
Yeah. Yeah, great question, and a noble question to think about, and only becoming more and more interesting for all of us in terms of like our national identity and fundamental economic security.
Yes.
I I think about what I think about playing to our strengths that we have in Canada. And I think about, we are a world leader in many industries. And so thinking about how we can use that advantage when we think about building technology as well. And when I say industries, I'm talking about some fundamental non-tech industries. That was very much on my mind when we conceptualized Ultimarii, specifically being based in Calgary. I think about, but I remember in business school there was like these, 5 Ps, which like can create competitive advantage. And
Yeah.
it's like
Michael Porter.
Porters. I never thought I'd think about the Porter stuff again. But I think about place. I think about place as an advantage, and it's like, okay, what advantage do we have over, someone building a company in Silicon Valley, quote unquote, the best place to build a company. Well, do they really understand? Do they really understand how energy works? Like how it's how it's produced, how it's moved, how it's priced, all of those components. And not that, me or Doug are super experts, but what we understood is in downtown Calgary, within a 2 kilometer radius, we have all of the answers we could ever want to those questions. And
Yes.
so the idea of developing this company in Calgary, and I think about and I put in my mind, okay, let's put a founder as well, smarter than us, and they're founding this company in San Francisco or New York. Could we have an advantage based on what we're choosing to build against? And that's why we're building Ultimarii is we're like, this is the best city in the world to build this company. Maybe someone in Houston able to build it as competitively as we will, or maybe someone in Dubai.
Yeah.
But we can have a huge advantage building it here rather than other centers. And so I think about that generally in terms of as we're thinking about, where to invest and where to found companies against, like use our place advantage that we have being based here in Canada and look at our incredible industries that we have and that we can build against to create advantage against people founding in other places. Because no matter what, I always know there's 100 other founders trying to do exactly the same thing as me in every country in the world. That's my mental model.
So where you went first is the place. Understand the place you're in, understand the strengths of that place, and look at opportunities to actually connect the dots there. So play out of Porter's five forces or five P's. Place
Yeah.
is where you. Now you've been investing. You said you have stake in 29 companies. Uh, Athenian would be, I'm going to assume, is at this moment the largest of them.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
definitely
definitely.
swings my net worth the most.
So what I'd be interested to know as an investor in tech companies, uh, how do you decide which companies to invest in? How do you choose which ones to pass? What is that process like for you?
Yeah, I do have a process. It's pretty simple. Number one, I'm an early stage investor. So because I think I have advantage there being a founder myself. I understand what it takes to take something from, 0 to 0.01 to zero point 0.5 to 1. And so that's where I invest. So I look for two things specifically. Number one, I look for a tenacious founder. And so this has nothing to do with the business plan or business model or TAM. I'm looking at the individual and I'm like, do they have tenacity, understanding all the challenges that they're going to face, all of the times they're going to get the door slammed in their face, whether that's an investor or a customer or a team member that they want to join the business. I know from experience that is like number one. We need to see that present, and so that's sort of gate number one. Gate number two is a little bit more specific, which is I'm looking at is it an industry that I'd be interested to follow and stay informed on, and so you could interpret that as like, is it growing? Are there changes that are happening in that industry? I just frame it as like, does it make me interested as an individual? If there's something in it that sort of tweaks my interest, then I'm like, okay, that is something that I'd be, worthwhile looking at. And then a founder that worthwhile staying in contact with and helping and understanding that they're a good bet, a good horse to bet on.
Mm. But it's the person first you mentioned. It's founder first.
I think about pre-seed and stuff, and I get why we have to put together business plans. They're complete. I mean, it's a complete farce when you're putting together a business plan, sort of pre-customer, pre-revenue. That thing is going to look totally different the second that you have your first customer or first bit of revenue. And so, I'm really looking at that individual more so than actually the business plan because I know that business plan is going to change 50 times in the span of sometimes even 1 year.
It's such a good lesson for those interested in starting their companies to hear from someone like you. So thank you for sharing that. So number one is the person. You're investing in a person. And what you described was not intellect necessarily, it was tenacity.
Yeah. And some people describe, I've heard others with other words. A lot of people call it resilient. Can you bounce?
Resilience,
I've heard other people, say grit.
grit. Yeah.
Mine is tenacity. I'm looking like, tenacity to me resonates a certain amount of aggressiveness, a certain amount of energy, the ability to just, jump into things and
And
try.
roll with punches, I guess, too, right? And roll with them punches. When you look at Canada, this moment in time and the opportunity for tech ecosystem to grow, um, I want to ask you for your thoughts on what is good, what is not good, how can we make not good better, system wide.
Huge, huge question. And I don't claim to understand the whole system, but areas that I do understand well, capital. I really feel like, especially in Alberta, that we do have a capital advantage compared to other ecosystems. And this is based on my personal opinion, or sorry, my personal experiences. There is great high risk capital here. Now let's go back, 20 or 30 years. What did we have? We had, entrepreneurs that looked at building energy companies. They had to go raise some, high risk capital because they didn't know what was under the ground.
Yeah,
They drill, some wells that work, some wells that don't, and people that understood that, made great money, and built these great companies that fundamentally they sold to larger companies to get, large amounts of liquidity. It is a perfect analogy. And so I'm describing junior oil and gas companies. Like, it's a perfect analogy for what we do with startups. Like, this idea of the unknown, of something being capital intensive, so needing to raise capital, and then the idea that you would scale it and you would exit it at some point. I think you could even backtrack 100 years and use the analogy of like homesteading and
yeah,
farming, a similar approach. And so that's like built into the fabric of the culture. And so you have people that are willing to take bets because they've built their businesses, on bets. And that's different than, when you talk to a banker or someone with like a financial background, or, you talk to someone who've made, their wealth sort of more generationally, let's say, and let's
yeah.
let's blend, some of the East. But in the West here, a lot of it is new and built on entrepreneurial endeavors. And so in my experience, as we raise money for Athenian, as we raise money for Ultimarii, and then I've seen, my portfolio of companies raise money. There's an incredible amount of high risk capital available here if you can sort of bring it to them in the right way. And I think that's a huge advantage. And I think there are a lot of ecosystems that would be, that couldn't recreate that. You can't recreate this 100 years of entrepreneurial history that we have here in this province.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true. We are known, I think, Canada wide for sure, maybe even worldwide, right? As the energy and enthusiasm and entrepreneurial place, right, in the country. So yeah, absolutely.
It's not just talk. People write big checks behind it. And
Yes.
like that is the key. And I find that there's a lot of hype. Everyone loves to, sit on an advisory board. Everyone loves to, give advice. And you see that in ecosystems all over the place. Here people will write checks to, high risk checks to back companies. And so, at a policy level, and I don't talk policy that much, but in I think it was 2017, we had this really cool program of the Alberta Investor Tax Credit, which raised some of Athenia's first money on that. And it even unlocked even more capital, and even like let it go a little bit riskier. And I saw that in a variety of different companies. And those types of programs, like if we're talking about policy levers, much more than the government itself picking winners through grants or through sort of initiatives like that, the idea of unlocking, capital for riskier and riskier endeavors really seems to me like the way to continue to foster this ecosystem.
Fantastic. So what you just described is a sort of positive aspect of our tech ecosystem and startups and scale-ups in specifically in Alberta, in Calgary.
Yes.
Where do you see the challenges and issues?
Yeah, there's challenges. I think about, again, I'm born and raised in Calgary. I've lived a few other places for a very short amount of time, but this is my home. And so a lot of my analogies and stories are about Calgary. When we think about the vibrancy of the downtown of Calgary, it's because we had a whole bunch of head offices, global head offices,
Yes.
based. What comes off of that? You get banking, you get legal, you get accounting, you get event planning, you get, meals and entertainment. All of that is because of a head office.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily like, I think about there's talk about satellite offices, where to create, high value jobs. That makes sense to me in the grand fabric of things, but the kind of vitality that comes from a head office being present and all of the services that come off of that head office, I think are what adds to a vibrant feeling, like commercial sector of commercial area of a city. And so I don't know if all of our strategies, at the, supporting tech and ecosystem and that, and tax really focuses on the idea of keeping head offices. I do think head offices create the vibrancy that everyone is sort of longing for, when they think about how, economic stimulus can affect the, society that builds
Yeah.
around it.
That's yeah. Actually, absolutely very valid point. I mean, clearly, and you mentioned in Calgary we have the fortunate, like in the span of 5 square blocks, world energy is there, right? The world's energy companies are there. Yeah. Um, Josh, I wanted to ask you about what would be your advice to a young entrepreneur, someone who is aspiring to, tip their toes in or dive straight in to be the founder of a tech company here in. Let's talk about what you're familiar with in Alberta. What would be your advice to them, or what would be your advice to your younger self?
Yeah, actually, my advice is get a whole bunch of advice, but be very thoughtful about applying it. And so I mentioned it a little bit earlier. Tons of people are willing to offer advice, which is amazing and very gracious of them to do so. Even I'm thoughtful as I invest in advice companies. I'm building a certain type of company, Ultimarii. I've built a certain type of company with Athenian, but that was back in like 2017, 2018 when we undertook different challenges pre-COVID, which is like a totally different world.
Yeah,
Advice is, especially in innovation, is so time bound. It's so time bound. And so I think about, VCs are offering a lot of advice. A lot of them are, past entrepreneurs. That entrepreneurial endeavor could be from the 90s. And of course, there's some, commonalities. But when it comes down to very specific strategy items, I really, my advice to entrepreneurs is like, be very first principles, look for fundamental primary information that's available to you. That's advantage, if you think about that, we have to be on the cutting edge of what's happening. And then be thoughtful as you receive advice, and view it through the lens that it's, provided to you, which is, is that advice current? Is that applicable to my industry? Is that applicable to my type of company? And so, number one, go and get all that advice. But number two, very thoughtfully apply it. And I see a lot of entrepreneurs, especially, um, younger, inexperienced entrepreneurs, like applying advice, sort of very specifically that they're receiving, and you end up going sometimes getting
yeah.
led.
So in other words, um, let me play this back. Um, Understand your why, and make sure that why is crystal clear Be flexible about the how you're going to get to the why, and don't follow somebody's advice because they gave it to you, but
100%.
rather look at the big picture, understand your why, appreciate advice, but be very mindful and thoughtful in what are the actual steps you're going to be choosing, kind of, right?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. For very big decisions, like, I'll try to get advice on it from 30 different perspectives before I let that inform what I want to do. Because no one is sitting in that chair. No one is sitting, in February 2025 with the current, dynamics and understand exactly what the context is. And so, collect that advice to understand, historically what has worked, but make sure you're applying it to what is today.
Yeah, very good. Very good. So Josh, this was fantastic. Thank you very much for telling us your story. Congratulations on the success already achieved, and best wishes for spectacular success with Ultimarii. I'm really glad that we had a chance to connect and share this story. Clearly, Ultimarii is addressing a very, very real, very present, and very material gap and an opportunity. I'm thrilled to hear that it's going so well that in a year you already have 15 clients, and it sounds like these are material, sizable organizations. Congratulations on that. Um, I would very much look forward to welcoming you and Doug back, perhaps a year from now, to reflect on how this all then unfolded going forward.
I would love that. I would love to talk about, yeah, what we did in Q1 2025, Q2, Q3, Q4, and have there be like meaningful exponential curve to every one of those quarters.
Thank you very much, Josh. This was fantastic. Very soon, we're going to post this on YouTube, of course. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time. Wish you all the very best and have yourself a fantastic and lovely Tuesday afternoon.
Amazing. Thanks so much for the opportunity, Dalibor.
Thank you, Josh. Bye bye.
Bye bye.